The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the House of Representatives and our nation's capital, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to connect you today with Congressman Beyer, representing the 8th District of Virginia. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Woody. Thanks for the invitation to be on the show.
Great. Tell us a little bit about your district, its geography, its diversity, and its economy.
Well, it's a remarkable district. It's the third best educated in the country in terms of the percentage of people that have college degrees. It's alleged to be the 5th wealthiest, although we do have pockets of poverty. It's probably the least gerrymandered district I've ever seen. It's Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, some of Fairfax County, so it looks just like a loaf of bread. None of these crazy gerrymandering things all over the place. And interestingly, 37% of the homes in this district actually speak a language other than English as their first language.
37%.
Yeah, but very highly educated, good incomes, but very diverse.
Now, do you have a lot of federal employees who work in your district?
That's a leading question. But yeah, I actually have 77,000. It's the congressional district with the most federal employees in the country. And in fact, we have more federal employees than 35 different states do themselves. And more federal contract employees than federal employees. So it's heavily related to the federal government.
So I take it that sequestration is not a good thing for your district.
Oh, the shutdown was awful. Sequestration, just in general, means all the cutbacks in federal spending have hit Northern Virginia and our 8th district particularly hard.
Now, besides federal employees, what kind of private entrepreneurship do you see in your district?
Well, we do have a lot of federal contractors, which is very important, but an awful lot of high-tech firms that are independent of the government. 20-some years ago, I helped co-found the Northern Virginia Technology Council, which now has over 1,000 members. So we're doing everything from cybersecurity for private companies to video games and everything in between. So because we have such a very highly educated, highly talented, very high IQ, great human capital in the district, we can do a lot of different things.
Now, you are a newly elected member of Congress, part of the new freshman class, but you're certainly not a stranger to politics. You were a lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia at one time. How has that informed your ability to pursue issues here?
In a lot of ways. I think I'm probably one of the relatively few members of Congress across the country that thinks and has experienced not just with his or her own district, but with the whole state. I spent 9.5 years traveling the state, all 134 cities and counties. And the great part is I have friends everywhere, but also at least some insight into the issues of the coal fields or the tobacco fields or the Shenandoah Valley. Things that I can hopefully will inform my judgment here. Also, I was Lieutenant Governor for Doug Wilder, a Democrat, and then Lieutenant Governor for George Allen, a Republican. And here, where the Republicans have significant majorities in both the Senate and the House, it's really important to be able to learn how to work across party lines.
Absolutely. And you also have a rich international experience. Talk to us about your experience as an ambassador.
Well, I was incredibly fortunate to get this job I didn't seek, which was to go be the ambassador for 4 years to Switzerland and to Liechtenstein. So we took our 2 teenage daughters to move to Bern, and it was a very fulfilling job. It was incredibly interesting because the nature of the things I'd work on from day to day were so different. One day we'd be working on resettling Guantanamo detainees that George W. Bush had decided were not threats to peace. The next day we'd be working on bank secrecy. The day after that, trying to make sure that we enforced the sanctions against Iran to bring them to the negotiating table. And the day after that, I'd be trying to get Roman Polanski extradited to Los Angeles for his crimes in the 1970s. So it was always fun to wake up and discover what was new.
So that also aids in your ability to broker deals, so to speak, here on Capitol Hill between both parties.
Well, yeah, and I've been an automobile dealer for 41 years, Woody, and we're always looking for win-win situations. You want the customer to be happy and to feel that they've gotten a fair deal, a good deal, and they'll come back. And Same here. I hate the win-lose politics, where we win and you lose, or you win and we lose. That it's all about trying to find, common sense solutions that make sense to most everybody.
And what about your committee assignments? How many committees do you populate now, and how important are those committees to your constituents?
I think they're very important. I'm on 3. I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which is very relevant. We have the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, DARPA, the big defense research institution, all in my district, and of course NIH is just across the river. So being able to invest in science and technology. I mentioned the Technology Council again, very, very important. One point in the 1990s, I think 75% of all internet traffic in the world came through my district. It's down a little bit now, but it's still pretty important. We even have the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is really an international organization just a block from my home that heavily relies on technology and on the FBI and DEA and Homeland Security to track down missing kids and exploited kids. So I'm also on the Natural Resources Committee, which is very relevant for all the national parks in Virginia and the use of public lands, and then the Joint Economic Committee, and that's probably central because the real challenge right now is trying to figure out what the 21st century American economy looks like, post-globalization, post-Budget Control Act, things like that.
Now, do you have any military installations in your district?
We have this one little one called the Pentagon, and we also have Fort Belvoir and Fort Beyer, and a lot of active duty military and retired military.
And the military obviously is very important in your district, in the state, and nationwide, and those veterans are very important as well.
Yeah, incredibly so. 2 commissaries. We're always trying to track the way veterans benefits are going and the incentives to draw people into the military and to keep them there. And so my district, again, is home to so many of the generals and admirals who lead our workforce, but then also the career civil servants who help make our military work. And once again, they've been really severely hit by sequester also.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now what about infrastructure, especially in terms of transportation needs?
Well, Northern Virginia has the worst traffic congestion, the longest commute times of any jurisdiction in America. We've passed Los Angeles, and it's tragic. I think it's an hour and 20 minutes now is the average commute one way for many folks living. I know you're Spotsylvania. It's just terrible how long it takes to get from Spotsylvania to here. And just last week we had big press conferences when the federal government shut down 2 of the 6 lanes on the Memorial Bridge.
Memorial Bridge, that's right.
That's the one that connects Arlington Cemetery and Robert E. Lee's home with the Lincoln Memorial. It's the #1 artery into Washington, D.C., 68,000 cars a day. And we just eliminated 1/3 of its capacity because it's so rusted out underneath. And one of the great challenges we have in Congress is trying to renew the Highway Trust Fund. Memorial Bridge is one of 70,000 bridges in this country that needs repair or replacement right now, and we just have not made the commitment to the money. The dilemma, Democrats and Republicans agree that we have to do this, but we're having trouble finding a funding source that we can agree on.
And speaking of that funding source, what about Metro? What's happening with that?
Well, Metro is caught up in the same dilemma with renewing the Highway Trust Fund because there was always money that was set aside for that. The hard part right now, Woody, is that some years ago, Frank Wolf, a Republican, Tom Davis, a Republican, and Jim Moran, a Democrat, all members of the House, crafted a 10-year agreement where the federal government would invest $150 million a year in Metro, and then the local governments would match that. This time, for the first year ever, the House has cut that from $150 million down to $100 million. And we're really fighting to try to get that back on the Senate side. It would set the bar way too low, not just for this year, but for the years to come. And as we have seen with the tragic Metro crash back on, I think it was January 7th, when Ms. Glover died, that we have really significant issues with cables, with fans, with wireless radio systems. There's a lot of investment that has to go into Metro now.
Now, you talked earlier about the diversity in your district. There's a huge debate that still rages here about immigration reform. I know that's an issue that you have a great deal of interest in.
Well, I do. They say that Washington, D.C. is the single most diverse city in the world right now. And we see, I think, 14% of the population in my district is Latino, but I mentioned earlier 37% speaks a language other than English at home. So finding a path to citizenship for the people that came here without papers is, I think, very important. We have a huge Dreamer program in my district, and I was just at brunch about 2 weeks ago. These young ladies and young men, 17, 18, 19 years old, they're as American as your kids or my kids. I mean, they're total millennials, very well spoken, thoughtful, going off to some good colleges. And I'm thrilled that our Attorney General has decided that they are qualified for in-state tuition here in Virginia.
Now, Virginia has a great deal of renowned institutions of higher learning, a great junior college system. Workforce development is a very important concept and something that has to be pursued relentlessly if the economy is going to continue to improve here.
Yeah, we're very proud of Northern Virginia Community College. I understand it's now the largest community college in the nation, and it's that way because there's so much demand for it. As Governor McAuliffe has said, that we have more jobs advertised in Virginia today than ever before, but we still have unemployment that's unacceptably high. The dilemma is the people without jobs don't have the skills for the jobs that exist. And the most obvious solution is our community college system, is to get those folks who need the skills. We don't want to give up on them and say they can't learn. That's not fair or true. Get them in the community colleges, working with the businesses so that they will then develop the skills necessary to give them good jobs for the rest of their lives.
Well, what can the federal government do in terms of workforce development?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to be matchmaking. Getting people in the right place for the right jobs. What I hear from almost every business that I talk to is they can't find the workers they need for the jobs that they've created. And this is true from the people laying roads to the people that are doing software development. A huge range. And the federal government, I think a lot of it is what's our investment in education. Right now we're struggling with reauthorization of what they call No Child Left Behind, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And again, one of the keys that we're working on, by the way, Senator Tim Kaine's been a real champion for this, is making sure that vocational and technical education is elevated above where it's been for the last generation. Woody, when we were kids, vocational education was a much more serious thing. We were training our electricians, our plumbers, our automobile mechanics, our draftsmen. And it sort of fell off for a while. Now we really need to renew it because not everybody needs a college education, but they all need the technical education to be successful.
And I believe Virginia, as you know, has a 2+2 program, which guarantees admission to our institutions of higher learning if you do well at the junior college level, and there's tuition grants available for that as well.
Yeah, it's a wonderful program because I think the number right now is that the average college student leaves with $25,000 in personal debt. And that is a barrier to buying a home, buying a car, certainly being an entrepreneur. It's tough to go out and start a new business when you have this debt overhang. You want to go get a job that's going to pay you a salary every week to do that. And so the 2-and-2 program means you can get those first 2 years for a much smaller cost. And I think a lot of people in Virginia are taking advantage of it.
Now, I think someone announced a few years ago that the recession was over, but you asked the average person, and I think you would get a negative answer, but I know that you're pushing to assist the middle class. Talk to us about your efforts there.
Well, the good news is we're 62, 63 months, straight months of job creation, 280,000 just announced recently. But what we have found is that wages haven't kept up. Basically productivity has been a nice upward curve for decades. And middle class wages, inflation adjusted, are basically where they were in 1979. So a lot of this is trying to imagine how do we get people into the new higher paying jobs. There's a lot of people that are upset about the textile jobs that fled and the low wage jobs that fled overseas. And while I miss them, those were not the jobs that were going to keep middle class growing, because the reason they went is because they were low wage jobs. And so there are little steps that affect more of the bottom end, things like raising the minimum wage, changes the way overtime rules work. But I'm more interested in the deep structural things, which is how do we create those middle class good paying jobs that pay $60, $80, $100, $120,000 a year for our people.
And I know you've also been focused in that regard on women's economic issues, especially in terms of equal pay.
Yeah, and it's bigger than equal pay, but that's a part of it. Woody, I'm impressed with all the studies I've read that show that businesses, corporations, companies that have more women in leadership, as chief executive officer on the board, at management levels, other way through the organization, are more profitable. There's a profit motive that can drive this rather than federal laws or regulations. And the same is true with economies. Countries that have more women deeply involved in their economy grow faster, greater GDP growth. And that, I think, means that we need to develop a culture where we have paid maternity leave, where there are child care tax credits, because for so many women, their take-home pay equals their child care bill, and it's a zero-sum game. And especially ways that when a woman is in the workforce and she decides to have a child or two, she doesn't get kicked off the career ladder. She doesn't come back to work and be put on the so-called mommy track. But she still has a chance to be the general manager or the CEO.
And of course, women are greatly affected, especially single women are greatly affected in terms of health care. There's a debate that still rages here in Virginia relating to Medicaid expansion. Talk to us about your feelings on that issue.
Well, I'm thrilled that some of the many good things that have come from the Affordable Care Act. First is that contraception is now free with no copay for almost every young woman, and long-lasting contraceptive too. So we're seeing really great plummeting rates in terms of the number of teen and unplanned pregnancies. And also I saw just recent statistics that abortions have plummeted the last couple of years too because of the Affordable Care Act. That some states have put in new restrictions. States with no new restrictions have had the same or a greater decrease in abortions than those that have the restrictions, because it's about providing women with health care choices that they can make for themselves. I'm also thrilled that the Affordable Care Act says you can't discriminate against women in terms of premium, because we were charging women more than men for the same health care coverage. I'm just baffled by Speaker Howell's and the General Assembly's decision not to expand Medicaid. It's crazy as a business decision. $5 million a day is what we're giving up, giving to other states, giving to Idaho and California and Texas. But we're paying it as taxpayers, but we're not getting it back. It's also crazy because it's 30 to 35,000 healthcare jobs we would be creating in Virginia. Those are not minimum wage jobs. Those are good jobs. It would help keep a number of our rural hospitals open, provide access for medical care. And bottom line, there are something like 400,000 Virginians who would have access to health care through Medicaid that don't have it right now.
400,000.
400,000. And to me, that's just a simple morality issue. It is, I know you can think about, well, maybe some year, 5 years, 10 years from now, the federal government may reduce its $5 million a day subsidy. I respect that. But the fact that we can deny 400,000 people health care day in and day out at no cost to the state is plain and simply immoral.
As you know, Virginia refused to create its own health exchange, and we're awaiting a Supreme Court decision, which could really upset the apple cart. If it holds invalid a provision of the Affordable Care Act, gosh, that could create a real chaos.
It will be totally chaotic, Woody. I'm hoping and praying the Supreme Court will uphold the existing law. But if it doesn't, we have millions of people who will lose their health care subsidy. Ironically, they will be mostly in Republican states with Republican governors. And so I expect that my Republican friends in the House of Representatives and the Senate are really going to have to scramble to find ways to get that money back, because it's tough to introduce a person to health care and the subsidies that make it affordable and then suddenly take it away.
Now, I take it that you've heard from a lot of federal employees recently as a result of this hacking of federal government agency databases?
Yeah, people are pretty upset. And they're mostly upset that OPM, I think, discovered it in March, got it locked down in April, and didn't tell anybody till the early June.
That's the Office of Personnel Management.
Office of Personnel Management. Yeah, the sense that there 6 or 7 or 8 weeks went by when they knew that our personal data, name, address, social security number, was out there in Chinese hands, and it was pretty embarrassing. You want government to function well, and when it doesn't, there's really no defense.
Now, I know you've worked with one of your colleagues from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, on some legislation dealing with predatory towing. Talk to us about that problem and why it's so critical to fix it.
Well, Woody, there's almost as many people upset about predatory towing as about Chinese having our Social Security number. It's one of those weird unintended legislative accidents that back in, I think, 1996, Congress passed a law that had to do with transportation and inadvertently said that tow companies would be subject to federal management and jurisdiction. And so we took it away from states like Virginia and local governments and said, okay, the government, the federal government is going to manage tow companies, and we don't. We don't have any consumer rules. We don't have really many safety rules. And so tow companies, I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful ones out there, and there's some predatory ones, some bad guys. And we hear from the people who got towed, who ran in for 30 seconds with the blinkers on and come back and the car's gone. And it's $180 later to get it back 3 days later. Just awful stuff. So what we're trying to do is give that authority back to states where it belongs. And I'm very optimistic that this is the kind of bipartisan legislation that can pass. So and then different states. Virginia may choose to handle it differently than West Virginia, and that's fine.
So I take it patience is a virtue around here because legislation is not enacted immediately.
No, I had 8 years in the Virginia Senate, which I just loved, and in the Virginia Senate we had a so-called regular order, and I didn't really know what it meant until I got here and saw without regular order. Because in the Senate of Virginia, I'd hit the gavel at noon every day. Everybody would be in their seats. We'd stay, and everyone would pay attention in a silent room to the speaker, and then we'd vote, and we'd leave, and it was very constructive. Here, they'll call a vote at 6:30, and people will straggle in for half an hour, vote and talk to each other. It's always, other than the occasional moments of silence for tragedies, it's always chaos. And you have no idea whether your good bill you put in the hopper will ever be brought up, will ever be heard in committee. Those are really up to the Speaker. This is a place that's very much driven by the leader of the majority. And if Speaker Boehner likes the bill, then maybe it'll go to committee and maybe we'll get a hearing on the floor of the House.
Tell us a little
bit. Very different. You have to be patient, and you have to take the long view. And you really have to find ways to work with the majority.
Tell us a little bit more about your work on the Natural Resources Committee. There's a lot of controversy because you mentioned coal earlier. There's a lot of controversy about Environmental Protection Agency rules and regulations.
Yeah, there is. And I try to be the strongest, clearest voice for the environment that I can be. One of the centerpieces of my campaign for Congress was for us to take bold action against climate change. It's not the kind of thing that people talk about when you knock on their door. When you poll, it only comes up 7th or 8th or 9th. But it is the thing that has the potential to change in a dramatically negative way the life that we have and for people around the world. Clean power plants are a big part of that. I think, though, that we're trying to strike the right balance, too. Coal has been a big part of the American economy and Southwest Virginia's economy. So this administration, in their energy bill this year, has an unprecedented amount of money for coal research, trying to find out how factories and power plants can burn coal and capture the carbon so that it doesn't affect the atmosphere. We're trying to do both. And people talk about a war on coal, and I don't think that's fair or true. In fact, in Southwest Virginia, the real problem is that fracking with natural gas has become so much less expensive than getting coal out of 20 and 22-inch seams.
So maintaining that balance, that delicate balance with protecting the environment, protecting jobs in the economy is a pretty tough thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're right, it is a balance. And we have to think about the long term. What's our environment going to be like? But we also have to think about what's happening to our workers and our homes right now. Because to lose your job is terrible for family finances. It can lead to poor health and depression and a lot of other things. So, we can't just fix one thing. We have to do a lot of things well at the same time.
And of course, it appears that we have to be a leader in order to convince others, for example, China, India, those other developing economies to cut back on pollution in their countries as well.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Woody, because sometimes some of my friends here will say, well, if we do it, it just doesn't affect the planet enough. But the reality is that if we don't do it, China and India, Brazil, South Africa, they have the perfect excuse to do nothing. and they can't do nothing. China is a much worse polluter than we are right now, and we have to be able to pressure them to take measures at least as bold as the ones that we take.
I know to some extent, even though you don't serve on a relevant committee, you were paying attention to what was going on in Germany recently, the G7 meetings. And as a diplomat, I know you follow those issues. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of those kinds of meetings abroad.
Oh, I think they're incredibly important. You know, when the president first took office back in 2009, he talked about how most of the problems in the world today don't respect borders, whether it's international drug flow or climate change or Islamic terrorism or whatever, and that the United States can't solve these problems alone, that we have to coalitions of nations, especially places like Germany, France, the United Kingdom, that we work together on. So the G7 is very important. This particular one was also critically important because they're trying to hold back Russia's advance. The Crimea and their advances into the eastern Ukraine are just a violation of international law and treaties, and there have to be consequences. You know, we're not going to go start throwing rockets at each other, but if we get Europe united, we can make the economic pain so great to Russia that hopefully they will do the right thing.
The USA Freedom Act just passed the Congress. I think the president signed it. It had a tough time in the Senate. Yeah. Tell us what you think really changed in terms of the reforms that were made.
Yeah, well, yeah, what did they say? That politics is the art of the possible. So you had folks like Rand Paul that wanted to go back to pre-9/11, and Mitch McConnell, the two senators from Kentucky, who wanted to keep it exactly the way it was the last number of years. I think we got a fair compromise, which reduces the amount of U.S. citizen telephone conversations that can be, first of all, listened to and kept, and then how long they're kept. So we're really after international terrorists. We're not after listening to what your wife wants you to bring home from the grocery store tonight.
That's a good thing. Thank you. We got about 30 seconds left. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell your constituents anything that we didn't cover so far.
Well, I love my job. It's a great honor to represent the 8th District. We want to be very accessible at all times. And then we've gotten 43,000 letters so far, and we've answered almost all of them. And many of them are inspiring the kind of leadership and legislation I'd like to offer.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. Our guest today has been Congressman Don Beyer, representing the 8th District of Virginia. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. Till next time, I am Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.